What I'd like to do today is spend some time with you on two focus points as it relates to capital needs update. So this presentation is kind of two-part. One part will be the funding for capital needs and how that's determined and where it goes, and some other information financially that I've worked with Ms. Scallon to prepare. And then the second piece of it will be kind of an update on what's happened the last couple months. As you know, we've been in schools, our operations department with Jacobs-Titan, and meeting with every principal and school representatives to identify needs in their schools. And so today you're going to get a presentation that highlights those needs. It does not do a couple of things today. It does not give you an exact dollar amount for all of the needs because I think there are still some things to be considered and options to weigh. It also does not identify exactly which projects are finalized on every list, because that absolutely would come back before this body at a different time as part of a capital program. But what it is intended to do, I think, hopefully, is advise board members on the needs that exist in the district, where they exist, and our ability or inability to meet those needs long-term with our current revenue streams from capital. So obviously, it's a discussional presentation, so as you have any questions or comments, please feel free to break in. I know the superintendent may have comments as well. I do want to thank some folks for helping to put this together, the information. Obviously, going out and visiting 38 sites, our operations department, Dr. Smith, Mr. Bolton, folks from our IT attended every one of those meetings, listened carefully, added input. Actually, Jacobs-Titan folks as well. And so there were a number of people around the table that could listen, add to, and help develop these needs lists. So we'll talk more about those when we get to those. If there are not any questions up front, I can get started. Yes, sir? Okay. All right, just a little background information for you. I think you're well aware of some of this stuff. We've got over 32,000 enrolled students now, and in that number it includes our public charter schools. We know we have 3 active public charter schools and 1 more that's scheduled to come online this fall.
Steve, real quick, yes, for the general public, there's always some confusion about our regular public schools and our charter schools. Would you please address our charter schools? Which schools are actually charter schools?
Yes, sir. We currently have 3 public charter schools in the district. Those are Liza Jackson Preparatory, which is a K through 8 school, the Okaloosa Academy, and Collegiate High School. Thank you. Okay. Collegiate High School at Northwest Florida. Right. So those are public schools. They operate with through the use of public funds. They have FTE, and they collect funding through the FEFP, the Florida funding model, just like we do. The school district operates as a pass-through agent in those instances. And so I know when and if you have specific questions about that, Ms. Scallon can address. And the 4th approved charter application would be for the Destin Charter High School.
And I'm glad that you announced those, because there's always confusion out there what's a public school, a traditional public school, and a charter school. So
yes,
thank you for.
And if I could just point out also for the public that governance of those charter schools is within their purview. They self-govern themselves, and so the decisions that they make, those are their decisions, and they may follow various school board provisions, but that's their choice if they do, and they may operate entirely different and really are not under the purview of this school board nor this superintendent.
Yes, sir. We have 38 district-operated schools.
That's right.
Across 37 campuses. Northwood Elementary and Richburg School do operate on an existing building structure together. And in truth, Riverside and Shoal River Middle School are 2 schools that are on one large campus together. And then the 3 operating charter schools that we've already identified. Just as a reminder to folks, as a capital needs introduction piece, 61% of our schools are over half a century old. We have over time added newer sections to schools under previous programs. We have not We have not added any new sections to schools since at least 2010. So we went back 10 years. And so wings or things like that, in working with Jacobs Titan in their construction program, that's what was reported to us. So 75% of our schools are over 45 years old. We have 2 schools that were built this century. That's Shoal River Middle School and Riverside Elementary School in Crestview. And then we continue to report 160 plus portables in use across our district with an average age of 27 years. One of the things that we'll talk about a little bit further along in this presentation is with the aging schools that we have and a growing population that we're going to talk about today, comes a need for more frequent repairs, more large dollar capital needs, such as roof replacements, HVAC work, and the like. And so the older our buildings get, the older our infrastructure gets, the more we're seeking to repair, replace. So the challenge is there. And then as a not last but not least piece, the bus fleet that we operate is among the oldest in the state. We, for the last two times in the last 5 years, have received surplus buses from another school district to help supplement our fleet and replace some of our older buses. So that's appreciated, but it's not something that's very pleasing to families and parents when they are looking at the condition and age of our buses. So I bring all that to bear today because it's all part of capital needs within the district and the reason why capital needs are what they are. The next slide I want to show you is a schedule of millages that comes from funding for Florida school districts for 2019-20. I've got an arrow there by the source of revenue that the school district receives for capital outlay, and that's the local capital improvement 1.5 mils. Some folks might remember that as 2.0 mil at a time years ago. It has been across the state reduced to 1.5 mil, and for the folks watching, essentially that means for property owners and folks who pay property taxes in Okaloosa County, after your exemption, your $25,000 exemption on your property taxes, someone would pay $1.50 per $1,000 of assessed value on their property. Those are the funds that come to the school district for capital outlay. There are other millages that are there. Many of them are set by the legislature and the Commissioner of Education, and the school district has no authority to change those. So we're referring to things like the required local effort at the top, the discretionary mill 0.748. It says school board on there, but that is the number that is provided to us by the Department of Education, and that's fixed for us. The other pieces below, the school district of Okaloosa County does not have any voter-approved millage increase, and in fact, Rita would tell you that I think that we, as a school district, are operating under the lowest millage rate in the last couple of decades, 29 years. And now, while property owners might see an increase in their taxes, it's not due to an increase in millage rates that this school board has imposed upon anyone. It would be simply as a result of an increase in their property values. And sometimes that does lead to an increase in taxes paid. But nothing that this board has done has increased taxes for folks for schools. So that highlights the extent of capital outlay funding for the district, with a couple of minor exceptions that we'll talk about on the next slide. Okay, comment, question?
You summed down until about, I'd say 10 minutes of full semester's course.
It's amazing what you can find on the internet. The next slide was produced by our own finance department, Ms. Scallon, and what this does is it identifies for the 1920 school year that we're currently in the capital project funds, and this applies for new revenue only, and I want to explain that as well because every school district is required by law to maintain certain reserves in funds, and so while those are sitting in reserve and needing to be maintained there for emergencies and things like that, this particular slide does not address that. It addresses what comes in a given year from Tallahassee and from the federal government. Okay, so you'll notice that the main line there is local total new revenue, of $28,821,225. There is a smaller component of state that is $907,321. If you go under the bottom there where it says major revenue sources, Ms. Scallon has identified where those are coming from. So you'll see under the local category, that is our district local capital improvement. That's our 1.5 mil county property tax revenue. Before I go to the next slide, the other amount is your capital outlay and debt service and PICO funding. And Rita can address that specifically, but I do know that PICO funding this year passed straight through to the charter schools. And Rita can address it.
Charter schools have their own allocation from the state, and you've heard us talk about it, like 50 million, and school districts in total throughout the state have 50 million, so you can see the disparity there, but this does not include the charter schools because it goes directly to them.
Well, in coming from a county like ours where we only have we'll soon have 4 charter schools, that amount of money, they're going to get a huge amount of money compared to other counties that have many charter schools. Is that correct?
And it's 50 million charter schools statewide.
Okay.
Okay? But still, in comparison to the number of charter schools compared to the number of public schools throughout the state, there's a huge disparity in the amount of money that we receive as school districts.
All right, so because the amount's the same, and there are fewer charter schools per school, charter schools will receive far more.
Yes, you said it much better.
Well, I had a chance to summarize.
It's always a good place to be. So this slide tells us where the money is coming from and how much is coming to our capital projects fund. The next slide shows us where the money goes. So if the board is being asked to consider a resolution for a voter referendum on a half-cent surtax, I think we need to be able to say, what money do we receive currently? Where does it go currently? And are we being as efficient as we can with those funds? Okay. So in this slide, you'll see that of those funds, debt service makes up a significant portion of that money that comes in every year. So this year, it's just a little over $6 million in debt service on bonds for previously constructed schools. The second category...
Can we just
Yes,
talk
sir.
about that
Sure.
for a minute for the
Yes, sir.
public? So when we say debt service, what do we mean?
We borrow money. We essentially borrow money to do something, and we have to pay it back, just like everybody else. So when you buy a car, you have debt service. You're buying a car now with someone else's money, in most cases like mine, and then you're paying it back over time.
Right. And so in this case, we borrowed money, I see your blue arrow there, to build a school because of student
Two
growth.
schools.
Two schools.
And then another school as well.
Because of student growth, yes, sir.
Right. And so the consequence of that is because we borrowed that money, we are now taking these capital dollars that we receive from the state to pay back that debt for
Correct.
building those schools.
Exactly right.
And this is, in that particular debt,
Yeah.
and that particular debt service is scheduled to end next year, I believe it is, or the year after?
Not next year.
It's 2 years
Yeah,
now.
I think
2 years,
next
yeah.
year it's about the same. The year after it's reduced, and then I think it's paid off after
Right.
that. And I think Rita, a few years ago, and it may not have been with this board, but oftentimes she's on the lookout for more favorable debt
That's right.
vehicles. And so there was a time where we could save some money as a district by restructuring and refinancing that debt, just like you do with your home
Right.
Right.
mortgage. And so we're always, I know she's always looking to do that, does a great job.
So just for the public information there, so that debt service will end in a couple of years, like we said, but until then, and if the voters don't approve a half-cent sales tax, then we technically really can't do anything until after that debt service is paid off if we want to try to build another school or something in the future.
That would be my recommendation, yes,
Right.
sir.
So you're talking 2 more years before we can even think about building another school. So you're talking maybe 5 years before we could actually get a school built, with the way it's set up right now.
So I think that's why we're here today,
Right.
to contemplate
Right.
the question.
And that's why I'm saying that.
Yes,
That's,
sir. Yes, sir.
5 years it seems like a long time, but it comes pretty quick.
It does. You're absolutely right.
And I just want to emphasize the point that I think you already made. These two schools were built how long ago?
2007,
20 years.
2007, yeah.
So
They
we're
were the only
still,
ones built this century.
because I've had the question, building schools is very, very expensive. We won't build a school for $7 million.
No, sir.
Exactly.
And it's
No,
not just
sir.
expensive in the cost of the facility, but in the land
That's
upon
right.
which to situate a
That's right.
facility, which we need to be sure we take into account.
So when folks talk to me about a half-cent sales tax and we can build all these new schools, the reality is, based on the revenue that would be generated, that would be extremely, extremely difficult, because I think the numbers I've heard is anywhere from 20 million to 40 million, perhaps, to build a school and acquire the land and so forth, maybe more. So I just wanted to point that out, because people are asking that question in the various community events that I attend, is that, oh, great, well, you'll have $6 million and you can build a new school. And the reality is they're much, much more expensive than that. And I know Mrs. Scallon will find the best rate possible and the lowest cost possible to do our construction projects, but I really appreciate you pointing this out.
Yes, sir.
Very
Yes, sir.
important.
And then so we move on into that capital project funds, district-wide technology. So all the computers and technology for classrooms and teachers all comes from that capital projects fund. Now, embedded in that question is, does it have to? Does it have to? Well, I think the answer to that would be, operationally, it's the most logical source for this particular program. So it is certainly available to use capital for this. This covers all of our infrastructure, all of our wiring, all of our devices in our schools. And so it is significant for the district. And we pride ourselves, while not being a one-to-one district, making sure all students have quality access to internet and programs. Eric Mitchell and those guys and Dustin Keith do a great job keeping up with things and refreshing devices and assets so that they are current for kids. We don't have 6, 7, 8-year-old computers that don't work on our shelves. We've got a good quality refresh program that keeps current devices in our kids' hands. We also are doing good work with our switches and our routers and our infrastructure to make sure our bandwidth is as robust as it can be. Okay? And the growth is exponential in terms of students and devices and their needs. And so we're always trying to keep up with that.
And of course, that's valuable, because that's what the employers ask. That's what families want. We want our students to be up to par and competent on the latest equipment and technology, so that they will be competent when they enter the workforce.
Yes, ma'am. Exactly right.
And it's how we do testing now,
Yes, sir.
Many times.
how we're measured.
It is. It is. The third column, and I think I forgot an arrow for this one, is our school maintenance, our general school maintenance transfers. So you'll see many, many districts do a transfer for general school maintenance. So that covers a lot of the projects, not the big roofing projects, not the giant HVAC, but the day-to-day things that we do to help keep our schools running, the things that sometimes people refer to as patchwork that we need to do because we have to do, and have a lot of deferred maintenance that can't be completed when it needs to be. And so that $5.5 million goes there. So it's not moving away from capital needs. It's addressing buildings. It's addressing our facilities and from grounds and stadiums all the way through to everything that needs to be done in a building from a maintenance standpoint. Okay, so what that does to me is it shows me that I've got about $11.668 million left this year for capital projects. That's that number that's up on the top, right? So the total of 29,728,546 minus the things we've already accounted for, paying back our loans on the schools and technology and transfers out, leaves us with that 11,668,908 in the middle of that sheet. Now, I don't have another slide for this, but we've talked about this many times. Those are the funds from which we derive school safety money, single point of entry money, perimeter fencing, parking and bus ramp solutions at Florosa Elementary that are working well.
Air conditioning?
Air conditioning. And so any number of large projects, it's from that we actually have to purchase portables and set up portables when we need them. So that $11.668 million spread across 38 schools, when a roof at Niceville High School, or actually 3 roofs that we're doing right now, if you've driven by, that 3-roof project is $1.4 million. The security that this board approved this year by line item was just a tad under $6 million for schools. So you take a look at that $11.6 million, you're down now to under $6 million, closer to $5 million. And then we've got many other things to do. So ADA compliant playgrounds that we're working on across the district, $250,000 a year budgeted to do that. So that money goes quickly. It certainly doesn't leave us with any ability to build wings on schools, to expand cafeterias and auditoriums and do those sorts of things that we know from visiting our schools is a needed piece. There's just no funding to do it.
And Mr. Horton?
Yes, sir.
And if you would even add on this, as you know, you talked about we have an aging bus fleet. And as you know, in August and September, we have a lot of calls about air conditionings. And I'm sure that'll come up again in May. And this is a source to be able to purchase buses. But you can see here, where you have limited funds, it's difficult to get on a bus replacement program. But if you could just address that just a little bit.
Absolutely. So with about 180 buses in our routes, we should be replacing that, refreshing that fleet at least 10 to 12 buses a year, and that even at 10 buses a year, it would be 18 years before we refresh the fleet. That would be, an 18-year-old school bus. Now, I think that's a great goal for us, and that's one of the things that we want to do, is make sure that our capital budget includes that. We can put coolers with ice water on the buses in the first 2 months of the year to help our families out, and we're going to do that this year. I haven't told Jay yet, but we're going to do that. But we really have got to get to a place where we're refreshing our bus fleet. It's a complicated set of parameters. Yes, sir.
And how have we currently been replacing our bus fleet?
Right, so that's where we've worked with Escambia County and received, I think in 2 different instances, some buses that they discarded as surplus. So they were of no value to them anymore. So we were able to get into an agreement with them, Mr. Chambers and the superintendent there, to bring in school buses. So if you go up to Transportation North, where they were initially brought in, you'd see Escambia County School District on the side of them while we work to repaint those and repurpose them.
And how old were those buses?
We're receiving buses from them that are 2003 through 2005, replaced some 94 buses. So what we were getting in was roughly 20 years old to begin with.
And I would just like to share something that I heard recently that explains this quagmire, if you will, that we're caught in now. The legislature has shifted their philosophy. I think we all remember at one time when the legislature provided money for those kinds of needs, the kinds of needs that we're talking about now. But instead, the legislature's philosophy now is that local citizens, local school districts are expected to help themselves and to solve their own problems. And the explanation was that's why so many other school districts in Florida and their citizens and their local folks passed sales tax measures to solve their own problems. And unfortunately for us, that hasn't happened here. But we're all hopeful and working hard that perhaps our own citizens will step forward and solve our own problems.
And I've got some information in some slides coming up that will highlight what you just said, Dr. White.
All right, thank you.
Yep. So here's the first of them. So this is a list of districts in 2018 who successfully passed a local tax and millage referenda. And so I believe there are 2, 4, 6,
21.
8, 10.
I think it's 21.
Yeah, this may not be, did you count them for me?
Well, we talked about it at.
This may have 20 on there, but I know Greg is very familiar with this list as well. And the fact that the outcome on the right, second to the right column for each of these voter referenda was passed. So you can see the ballot question in many of those cases had specifically to do with a half-cent sales tax for capital. I don't have every number, but in those places where the ballot question was for some millage increase, which could typically be used for operating expenses, some of them say for salaries and other pieces, but the millage increase, which is a different question than the sales tax, one's for property owners, one's for everyone, including tourists, and we'll speak to that some. But I would venture to say that most of those districts, or a good portion of them that were getting a millage increase in that year, already had a half-cent sales tax for capital. So Dr. White is exactly correct. We are in a severe minority situation as it relates to sources of funding for capital improvement. And board members, you know that, but this just highlights it some.
Well,
Yes.
and on this particular issue right here, I mean, this particular slide, every county that proposed, all of them passed, pretty significantly passed. And I noticed Martin County did the millage, which was, that was, for them to be able to pass that, that's huge because you're dealing with just one particular population of folks. But, it's encouraging that these counties have taken that initiative and their voters have voted to help out. So.
Yes, sir. And you'll notice, board members, that there were 3 categories for the type of referendum: special, ballot, primary, or general. And as we've mentioned before, the law changed subsequent to that 2018 year, and now all half-cent sales tax questions must, by law, be placed on the general election ballot. So that would be in November of 2020. Okay? There was a time where you could do a mail-out ballot and other mechanisms, and that time is long gone. Here's another slide that I thought was interesting. So this takes our district and compares it to 2 districts, one that is a slightly smaller in enrollment and one that's slightly larger, Alachua and Leon County, and then another district, Sarasota, that is typically, at least in the last few years, as we rate number 4 in the state, they're typically in the top 2 or 3 in the state academically in terms of performance. They're about 44,000 students, whereas we're at 32,000, so it's still relatively close. So what you see there is funding that districts realize this current school year from the 1.5 mil capital outlay. There's our 28.8 number. Funding that those districts received from a half-cent sales surtax. So you'll notice 23 million, roughly 22 million for Alachua and Leon County in additional funding, 20.6 million for Sarasota. And then on top of that, impact fees, because as we know, certain county commissions can approve impact fees on development that funnels through to the school district. We do not have that. Alachua does not, Leon does not have that, but Sarasota has that as an additional source of funding for capital projects. That's 4.2 million. Now,
I think our neighbors to the west of us just approved an impact fee. Was that Santa Rosa County?
Yep.
Right, and then last night Hillsborough County actually approved an impact fee for their schools too.
So, not to muddy the waters, but I think
Right.
if we're looking at a half-cent surtax, that's probably what we're looking at.
Well, and the reason why I brought that up is it's just showing that they understand the investment, the future of public education, and they're looking at it as an investment. So.
Yes, sir. Now, I want to speak, too, for just a minute about that 95.6 million number for Sarasota. And so that's that 1.5 mil money, and it's very simply the property values in Sarasota County generate that much tax revenue based on the 1.5 mil levy, right? So the more valuable your property is in a county, the more 1.5 mil money a school district would receive. So speaking, yes, sir.
And along those lines, in Okaloosa's case, how do we factor in the fact that roughly 50% of our property belongs to the federal government?
Well, what we do is we collect property taxes on 1.5 mil on those pieces of property that are taxable. That military property on Eglin, Hurlburt, 7 Special Forces, Duke Field, that we have so much of in our county is not taxed. And so therefore the school district does not receive any funds for capital from that piece. Now, there is, and has been for a while, federal impact aid, which comes to us from the federal government as a result of those FIC cards that we complete, identifying that our parents are active duty military and are work on base and those sorts of things. Ms. Gallen could speak specifically to this if she tells me I'm a little bit off. The funding for that has come up slightly in the last couple of years. It had dipped to as low as about $1 million district-wide, and has now come up to close to $3 million. But those funds are not earmarked and able to be used for capital use.
And I remember a time when the federal government provided impact aid funding for local school districts that has separate provision for capital projects. And of course, as you said, no longer do they do that.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Horton, also in light of Dr. White's comments, which he was absolutely right on the mark in terms of property taxes and such. So I'll also discuss Walton County, who's a great friend of our district, but discuss their county as well.
Yes, sir. So Walton County lacks the military base and presence that we have in Okaloosa. Their taxable value on their property is such that it generates essentially the same amount of 1.5 mil money as Okaloosa. So whereas we have a little under 30 million, this year they had a little under 30 million. The difference being Walton County has a third or less than a third of the number of students that we do. And then conversely, we have 2.5 times more facilities than they do. So you take that capital budget and spread it over 38 sites or 13 sites, whatever the number is today, it makes a difference in what you can do in terms of how deeply you can delve into schools and projects. So not Walton County's fault. The funding mechanism that supports capital in schools is what it is. And that, again, that's what produced the number for Sarasota. It produced it for Walton County. And so they have that benefit to spread over far fewer kids and locations. And this is a little bit in the weeds, but I just had to put this slide up here, folks. This is information from the Department of Education on annual plant maintenance and cost of operations. So what it does is it looks at our square footage for the entire school district, which is a little over 4 million square feet. It looks at how much money we spend on the operation of our plant and the maintenance of our plant. And there are some definitions below of what that means. So there's utilities involved there, phone service, disposal, sewage, custodial cost, everything. Plant maintenance would be keeping up with the grounds and other pieces. And so these two things to me are an indication of how much effort and money we're putting into maintaining our facilities. You would think that the older the facilities are, the more in disrepair they are, the less efficient they are from an HVAC standpoint, you'd be spending more money in this category. Well, in fact, I think the maintenance and facilities folks do a great job. The state average for this particular metric is $5.39 per gross square foot. Okaloosa spends $5.49 per gross square foot. So at 10 cents a square foot over the state average, when we have the oldest facilities in the state, I think is a testament to Bill, to Steve Bolton and the zone foreman in trying to make sure we're doing everything we can to minimize the expense that we pay to keep up our schools on the maintenance side. Now this is a 17-18 report, it's the latest one out. We want to make sure that we keep looking at that. I would offer to you though that if we had better facilities, if we had better HVAC, if we had fewer things that need to be done in our schools, it's probably likely that we could lower that to the state average, if not better. And so just from a point of reference, 10 cents per square foot over 4.5 million feet, the math on that is about $475,000 a year. So I think there's some benefit to be gained if we can do some things that improve our infrastructure, improve our facilities, lower our maintenance costs, that we could actually see some return from that area and I'll never use the word savings, but just not having to expend those dollars, as many of them. So that would be a target.
And I agree with that thought, that logic, but, and of course, the converse of that would be, if we don't remediate these facilities, what might we expect those costs to do?
Correct. The logic would be that they would move higher as we get older and older.
Right.
Yes, sir. All right. Then this is I put side note on here, but I think as board members, you get asked lots of questions, and sometimes capital gets mixed in with non-capital. And I think it's important that whatever we're asked, we have an answer for, and can provide to board members that need to share that otherwise. So what this is, again, this is from the Florida Department of Education Educational Funding Accountability Act, and some of their information is lagging coming out, so you'll see this is for the 17-18 school year. So what this does is, it's a metric that takes a look at essentially the enrollment in your schools, the unweighted FTE. So I'm just going to, in simple terms, that's almost equivalent to enrollment, but not quite. And it looks at how much money is being spent for administrative costs in the school district. And this particular report tracks general fund expenses and special revenue fund expenses. And so what are we doing as a state reports on administrative expenditures? And so what you'll see here, I've pulled all of the districts in Florida that are between 22,000 and 36,000 unweighted FTE. So that is a comparable list of schools. And I can't always account for different salaries and other things in different parts of the state if the cost of living is greater or less than, so I haven't factored that in. But what you'll see there right now is, at least at initial blush, it really wouldn't be said with any level of accuracy that the administrative expenses in Okaloosa are way out of line with any other school district. In fact, they're in the middle, on the low end in some cases. And so I wanted you to see that information and know that it came not from me, but it came from the Educational Funding Accountability Act. So I think it's important in terms of folks understanding and having some confidence in how the district not only manages capital, but everything else. And so that's one indicator. And I've always looked for others, but again, report that based on like-sized school districts.
So just for the public's on this one here, define administrative.
I'll have Rita do that if she
Okay.
would be able to.
I think there's always that confusion about, are we talking about assistant superintendents, high-end, so what would be the definition so that people would understand? What is administrative?
Okay, and let me just start off by saying, when you look at this chart and it says administrative, I know that typically people think of salaries. Well, salaries are included in here, but this also includes all expenses within an administrative unit. So it's heating, cooling, which again, you could look at our aging facilities, our cooling, our plumbing, those kinds of things. Any cost out of the operational budget that we're spending for that. But it's not only assistant superintendent, it's all the way down to support services in the schools. The schools front office, their secretary, that's all included in this term administrative. It's a little deceptive because immediately you would think that this is talking about just district offices, but it's not. It's including school operations at the front office, all of the people that you have in there, and heating, cooling, dealing with that floor space.
And it also, in fairness to our district and every district in the state of Florida, there's also a lot of positions that are created every year by the state that we have to fill. So that does add on to our job descriptions in the administrative level. So, like we had to add the safety, so these, right. And that's why I wanted you to explain, because people look at administrative, they only think of the top part of the administrative. It's all the way down. So, thank you, Ms. Kell.
We're at the bottom of the pyramid looking up.
What's that?
I said we're at the bottom of the pyramid looking up. Assistant superintendent.
Right, and for me, drawing the immediate contrast between Okaloosa and Bay County and the number of students and looking at the cost, if you will, for administrative cost is Ours is very low.
And, you know, like I said, this is 17, 18, so as Rita says, there are many components to this, and it's not just salaries. I do know that Mr. Chambers brought and the board approved a restructuring last year that eliminated some
Right.
administrative positions and returned some needed positions in ESE to the classroom. So whether that has a big impact here or a small impact, we'll find out when the numbers come out. But like I said, it's a lagging indicator, so it's going to take a while for
Right.
those numbers to arrive. Okay. All right. Anything else? Okay. All right. So now we're going to move into, so you kind of have a picture of how much money we receive, where it comes from, what happens to it in a given year. And now we're going to go into the capital needs side of it. So this is where we began and sat down with Jacobs Titan and all of our schools in specific meetings at the school site to identify needs. What I want to do here is kind of outline for you the process that we went through. So this would be our mission statement in the operations department in support of the school and the superintendent and the school board. And it would be to identify, develop, and recommend a long-term capital program that does the following: addresses the academic needs of schools from a facility standpoint, improves and renovates the condition of schools, both building and site work, in order to lower recurring maintenance costs and improve functionality for staff, students, and parents. That's that operation of plant piece. Ensures the safety and security of our students through establishment of single points of entry and perimeter fencing. Provides improved technology infrastructure in order to maximize web-based student learning opportunities. Refreshes the district school bus fleet on a sustainable schedule. And very importantly, and you'll see this coming up, addresses enrollment growth either through the thoughtful expansion of existing facilities or new construction. And so I think that's something that we really will be having to take a look at, and you'll see in upcoming slides. But these are the things that we feel that we're compelled to do to make sure that when we're retired, that this district's in a good place from a school standpoint. So we held meetings in January with the principal, as I mentioned, and other staff, district facility folks, Jacobs Titan folks, to kind of go over the needs of the school with the principal. We brought with us specific information that we knew from maintenance work order histories or enrollment projections, so that when we walked into the meeting, we all had a sense of where it looked like the enrollment in the school was going, what are the biggest issues based on work order analysis, and so using that process to develop a list of needs.
And Mr. Horton, I would like to speak to that just for a moment, because in my opinion, there has been circulated a fallacious argument that perhaps the school district and the school board could have planned better over all of these years. And so in light of this information, we've always had a 5-year capital outlay plan, a 5-year capital outlay budget, but that was created in light of the available funds that we had. We always knew there were other things that needed to be done. And so now we're bringing those forward in this new list. But this school board, this school district, for the last as many years as I can remember, has always had a 5-year capital outlay plan, where we did that plan based on the available revenue that we had. And we knew there were things that needed to be done. I mean, when we talk about these old schools, one thing that often gets overlooked is the underground piping that corrodes and erodes and has to be replaced. And we've always known that. We just never had the money to repair it, as your slides have shown. But I want to make sure that the public knows that this school board and this administration and the previous administrations and the previous school boards have always had a 5-year capital outlay plan. We've always had a plan, but that plan has been based on the revenue that we had to spend. And I just wanted to make that point in light of that, what I believe is a fallacious argument that's being circulated.
And in fact, Dr. White, I believe that that is required by state. I think that we must have that. It's due periodically to the state.
Absolutely correct. Yes, sir.
And Mr. Horton, and to add on to what Dr. White said and what Dr. Kelly just spoke of as well, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, so talk about Niceville High School's roofs and how that impacts what Dr. White just stated.
Well, the best laid plans. And so we have a number of, we came into this school year with a number of schools that we knew needed roofs. Niceville was not at the top of that list, but subsequent to this summer and fall and some continued deterioration, it was deemed necessary by all folks in the facilities department and with Jacobs Titan involved as well, that Niceville's new roof had reached a point where it had to be replaced. And so the plan contemplated Niceville's roof being replaced at some point down the road when funding was available, but it needed to happen now. And so that $1.4 million had to be essentially moved to be able to do that. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
So at these meetings, we did not address budget, we did not address availability of funds. It was understood by all that our source of funds would not be enough to cover all of the needs that exist in all of the schools, and that is absolutely what we determined through this process. But it was really about looking at what those needs are. Second thing, we approached this four-pronged. So one of the things we asked each principal was, does your building meet the academic mission of your school? So does it do what it needs to do? Does it allow you to teach and learn in the way that you need it to? And I'll give you an example of that. One of our schools has some labs that were built a long time ago where the room is kind of partitioned, where you've got kind of lecture seating on one side that's very tight. And then you have some space off to the side that's adjacent that is for lab. And it's shared as a possible need, but certainly priorities are what they are, that setup with the number of kids that are being placed in that classroom on a daily basis, you're filling up your lecture side for your class time, and then 3 kids are sitting over here on lab tables kind of sideways and out of view, and it's not optimal. And so is the facility as you have it right now meeting the academic needs? Are there career technical components that you wish to implement in the school that you can't really do right now because the facility wouldn't support that? So that's one of the things that we talked with each of our schools about in their principals. And they've got a great vision for things that they would like to accomplish in the schools. The second one is the one we hear about a lot, that's facility condition, the overall health of the building on campus. Does it heat, cool, feed, maintain a safe environment for learning? Are things falling, from the ceiling panels or
underground,
or coming up from underground, or the restrooms don't work half the time, those kind of things. So we focused on that too. And again, this is where the maintenance folks, facilities folks have a big input in terms of how often they're working on problems at a school. The third thing was the site condition, which sometimes it gets overlooked, and this is a critical component, especially as you look at growth and what might occur when you have growth. Does the infrastructure, does the parking, does the queue space all work in the current state, or if there was growth needed or expansion needed or an extra wing needed to be built on a school? Because there are all these trickle-down effects of what happens if you add classroom space, and it ranges from cafeteria to parent pickup to restrooms and all those other components that are all linked. So it's not feasible in most cases just to drop a 10-room addition onto a school, because you've got so many other components that have to then be touched as well. And that's a critical piece. And then the fourth is growth. And so we looked at each school, where they've been the last 10 years, where they're going the next 10 years. Clearly, projections, Wendy Meserve, our MIFT program director, will tell me if you try to go out past 5 years, you might be shooting in the dark, but I think we have done enough looking and understanding about our area, and the consistency of even though we have folks move in and out all the time, our military bases are strong here, and that's our indication. So we expect to see continued enrollment in the years to come. But we looked at those with the schools. So you may have a school that has a handful of portables in a certain location, but their enrollment is flat or slightly declining And then, so does it make sense to go in and immediately replace all those portables with classrooms in the first year of any program, or bide our time slightly and decide if the actual enrollment of the school is going to help solve the issue? We were put into this condition, that's the wrong way to phrase it, but the class size amendment put us in a place where we maximized our classroom space quickly. So when you and I were in school and we had 30 to 35 students in a class, maybe not ideal, but we figured it out. But now we can no longer do that. Certainly at elementary, it's 18 and 22. And so we've filled up classrooms, even in schools where the growth has not been that significant over the last 10 years, class size itself, and that's not something that this board implemented. It's a constitutional piece, and it's required in statute, and there are penalties for not complying with class size. So we make every effort to make sure we do that. But that's one of the reasons you'll see when we look at this that some of our schools have filled up.
And I hate to keep interjecting,
No.
but I would say that the public should know that it's not just classrooms that we filled up. We filled up stages, we filled up portions of cafeterias, and we turned those into classrooms before we moved to bringing in portables.
Right.
And now we've done both.
That's exactly right. So in a school where there are 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 portables, you're going to look and you're going to find other spaces in that school that are not ideal for classrooms that are classrooms now, whether it be off of a library or something along those lines. So when we say 160 portables, the impact of that is really not 160. It's really more than that based on spaces, that folks are using for classrooms. One of the things that we now are looking at doing, and again, coming out of today, I won't be presenting you a list of every project at every school for your approval. It'll be hopefully a sense on your part of the scope of the need and the lack of available funding to meet that need. So we'll go forward once we conclude this process and continue to work to identify those final project lists for every school, because in some cases, the district would in place, and I know Mr. Chambers and this board does, safety and security above all else. And so where that has to happen, it still needs to happen, it will happen. And it'll happen whether this surtax is approved or not. We'll have to continue to make sure we work through our single point of entry projects as quickly as we possibly can. The learning environment in the classrooms, and then growth. So prioritizing those needs is something that's a challenging thing to do. And it's not always the case that everyone agrees on what the priority is. I think that's an important piece of it, because when schools have input, they understand what their needs are. This board may also have some ideas about what priorities are in our classrooms from a safety standpoint. And so those obviously are blended together to come up with the list of projects that we think we can support over the next several years based on sources of revenue.
And I have a question about
Yes, sir.
that, Mr. Horton, because I remember that I believe the last time our local citizens voted to support the half-cent sales tax, I think it was 1995.
It was.
There was a specific list provided for every school as to what would be accomplished with those funds. Do you envision us having the same kind of document?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that document would be completed and vetted through all of the appropriate folks, including principals and school-based folks, prior to anybody getting anywhere near a ballot box, a ballot booth.
Excellent.
And so that would be something that we'll continue to work on if this board passes this resolution and sends it to the county. We'll be working on that immediately and continuing to do that through the rest of this school year, with the anticipation of those final approved project lists being ready in the summer.
I think I remember that document actually appearing in the newspaper as a full-page ad at one time. So
Yes, sir.
everyone knew clearly what was going to be provided for at every school, and there was a list.
Yes,
It was
sir.
a metric
Yes,
that
sir.
we could be judged by.
And to be clear, that the responsibility for producing that list falls on us, falls on our principals, our board, our superintendent, and we would be the ones, and you would be the ones who would approve that list finally. At that point, if there's a group out there that's representing the half-cent sales tax in a public domain, we would simply hand that list off to them and say, here's what we intend to do. And so that process is something that we're going to continue in earnest through the rest of this school year to complete.
And if we're blessed enough to receive this half-cent sales tax as it pertains to this discussion, what is the accountability measure that we would utilize to ensure that the funds are spent on exactly what we say that they're going to be spent on?
Yes, sir. Well, this board has already looked at resolutions in the past, and I think they would, not to put words in your mouth, but I think you've already indicated that it's important that there be a citizens oversight or citizens advisory committee that looks at this carefully, that looks at the expenditures of funds as it relates to the projects that the board has approved, and make sure that they report transparently, not only back to this board, but also through public, whether it be a public dashboard to track projects for this particular district and this capital program, that is widely reported and transparent, that the projects are being completed as identified. So that's a critical component. I would expect that since I'm the public information officer, I'd be coordinating after the fact with the Daily News or anyone else who wants to do updates on where are we 6 months, a year down the road in terms of our project completion. But that is, I think, is a critical component to it. And the other piece, obviously, is these funds are specifically earmarked for capital and nothing else. And so they can't, by law, be used for anything else. They can't be used to pay salaries. They can't be used to add staff. They can't be used to buy textbooks. They've got to be used for defined capital purposes that we've outlined today.
And for the public, when we say capital, what does that mean?
It could be construction, renovation of facilities. It could be technology and infrastructure. It could be school buses.
Heating and cooling.
It could be heating and cooling.
Underground piping.
It can be piping. It can be roofing. Any number of those items that involve the physical plant in the facility, and technology and buses.
And so that's what capital outlay means, and I appreciate you defining that for the public.
Yep.
And to add on to that, that doesn't go toward salaries or benefits or anything else that's out there besides. Yep.
Correct. It will be the most closely monitored and accounted for spending that we have. I would venture to guess. Yeah. Because I think there's a level of trust there, because we will identify that this particular surtax opportunity won't fix and correct every issue in the district, and it won't completely cover our growth needs long term. But there are some that hope that if we do this right the first time and report it right correctly and accountably be accountable to it, that somewhere down the road, if we have the opportunity to do it again, we may be received favorably.
And as the public looks at this new initiative, I hope that they would look back at our success in 1995, along with our partner, and the kind of stellar job that was done in our schools with the promises that were made then and those promises that were kept.
We definitely have a roadmap to duplicate that. Yes, sir. The fourth piece of this, the implementation strategy, speak to a little bit. One of the things that we've talked about, obviously, a half-cent surtax will bring in some revenue, estimated revenue. Some indications are potentially $23 million a year over the life of a half-cent surtax that could be 10 years long. I think that's what's being contemplated. There's an amount of money for that, but that doesn't mean the district does nothing else. So the capital outlay budget that is now coming to us every year from the 1.5 mil money, we have to be smart about leveraging that money as well to make sure that we can accomplish as much as we can in a healthy manner, fiscally responsible manner, so that we can address as many of these capital projects that need to be addressed that are priorities. So I think it's important for us from a senior staff level to make sure the board is presented with options for if the need identified at the first glance is $480 million, and we think the surtax might generate $230 million, does that mean that $250 million doesn't get done? And I don't think that's necessarily the case, because as Mr. Bryant mentioned and Dr. White, even the debt service on those previous schools is going away in a few years. And so I think we've got to do the best job possible with our existing capital outlay money, that $29 million a year, and leverage that to be able to do some of these projects as well. So we'll look at it not as just a $230 million capital project. I think we have to look at it overarching. So over 10 years, the amount of money from our capital budget that we think we can dedicate to some real capital needs, if it's $10 million a year for the next 10 years, that's another $100 million potentially, which brings our pool of available funds to maybe $330 million. So I think we have to do the best job we can responsibly to identify those funding streams that can help us accomplish as much as we, as I said, we can do so in a responsible manner. Does that make sense? Okay. Ms. Scallon is probably the best there is out there in those areas, and so as we've spoken some, being able to determine how much is the right amount, how much capital to put toward projects, and make sure that long term, after I'm retired, that we still as a district have the ability to meet our obligations and do the things we need to do, because it's not possible just to do everything and then charge it up on a credit card. It doesn't work that way. So this is a brief summary. As I said, there's a slide for every school of some things that I highlighted from the school responses. So we have 30 schools that are identified with roofing needs at some level. We have 38 schools. Now, I don't want that to be portrayed as we have 30 schools whose roofs need to be replaced today, but it is identified in their needs. So it's not something that we would say, well, we're going to do every single one of these this first go around.
Right.
It just gives us a sense. 22 schools are still working on single point of entry and perimeter security. The board has authorized us to move as quickly as we can with those, with all the funds that we have available. 19 schools identified as needing classroom additions, so those are folks who have portables and have identified from a security standpoint other things that's something that they would like to address.
And Mr. Horton, if
Yes,
you
sir.
would, I want you to go back to the single point of entry, and I know Mr. Destin has as well as the entire board, has placed a lot of emphasis on the safety, the security. You know, we have a phase 1, we had a phase 2, and just talk about the expedited nature of phase 2.
So the board did act quickly last year to move the second phase into the first phase, so that was another 8 schools. And when I say single point of entry, I want to make sure everyone understands we've already installed the AI phones and locked doors on all of our campuses in the front, so that parents have to ring to get in and verify who they are. Many of our schools have fencing already, not complete fencing, and our single point of entry projects also have some other pieces to them that create secure entryways for parents and all to drop off kids and that sort of thing. So we're working right now on 8 schools, and we'll have those finished up. And again, rain or shine, regardless of what happens with this particular surtax, we're going to bring to you another request for the next set of schools to begin as quickly as we can.
Mr. Horton, real quick on the, you mentioned airphones. Explain what the airphone is, what you're talking about.
AI phone is that audio-visual device in the front of the schools where
Okay.
a parent will walk up to it, or even a student who's getting there
Right.
late, and they'll push the button, and it's a two-way communication
Okay.
with inside staff. It's a video and audio.
Right.
And so the staff then can vet that person and push a button from their desk and let that person enter the school.
Right. Well, in the sake of transparency, you did say all schools. I would have to respectfully.
There's a couple of schools
Okay.
where we're working on their project
Right.
because it
Right.
wasn't feasible based on where the
Right.
front office was. You're
But when
right.
you say all schools are, I wanted to make sure the public knew that, yes, we are going to put them in all schools, but not all of them right now are operational.
Yeah,
So,
there are a couple where
Right.
that phone's not up and
right.
running.
So,
And, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
And that brings up, and I will speak just a bit about it later during board member comments, but in 1995, the school board and the superintendent decided that none of the half-cent sales tax funds would be used should the voters approve it for administrative offices. And that will be something that I suspect that the school board will talk more about later. But I would point out, and Mr. Destin, I appreciate your work on this, because when we look at those 22 schools in need of a single point of entry, the reality was and is at one particular school I know of, we had to spend capital outlay money on an administrative office because we had to relocate that administrative office. And so I would suggest that in that case, that would be an appropriate expenditure of those funds, because there was no way to have single point of entry at that school with the school office located where it was. And so I think that as we head into this particular area, we'll probably have to understand that, yes, in some cases, because of those kinds of constraints, some of these funds might have to be spent in that manner, but we should be very specific, and we should point out clearly why those funds would be used that way to the public so that they understand. It's not about building Taj Mahals in school offices. It's not about that at all, and it certainly wasn't that case in 1995, because I remember I needed one but didn't receive it.
And Dr. White, I believe, you were talking about a previous, but we do have a school out there right now that is going through that.
Right.
But those offices are going to be converted into classrooms, so
That's
there's
right.
going to be a trade-off on that. So.
Right. And I'll talk about my visit there a little bit later.
Yes, sir. And for the folks in public, that rationale is very simply schools that were built 40, 50 years ago oftentimes had the administrative office in the center of the school. Baker's an example. And so you can't have a secure campus where folks have to come through a single point of entry to the front office area if it's in the middle of the school. So I think that's exactly what you're speaking to.
I might make one comment, Chairman. As Mr. Horton has assured and we all support, we're going to go ahead with the security needs of our schools, irregardless of the passage, but I think it needs to be real clear to the public, and I'm trying to make that so that to do that, we will have to take the money, approximately $20 million, out of our current capital flow, which is inadequate to the extreme right now. So this half cent is very, very important to us being able to go forward with our security needs. Without the half cent, can we do it? Sure, but we'll have to defer $20 million worth of other projects in order to do it. And so, without the half cent, it's a decision.
Right.
Do you care about the safety of your children and grandchildren, or is it not a priority? And that's kind of a stark decision, but it's one that our citizens are going to face.
Right. Well, and Mr. Destin, out of respect for you and your position outside of the school board, in your particular business, I mean, if you don't have money coming in, I mean, what do you do?
You cut other things,
Right.
you're in trouble.
Right.
Sir. So that identified a list. I won't read it for you, but those are some of the things that indicated. Jacobs Titan has a good ability and a track record to look at, and board understands that if they're working on a project for us, there's a whole pre-GMP and GMP process that identifies specific costs, and those costs are vetted and validated by an independent party. And so those pieces, obviously because there are no plans and designs for this, have not happened, but they do have a good ability to give us information about cost estimates that are non-binding, but it does provide us a sense of scope that allows us to kind of go forward with this process. So that's kind of, and again, at the end of the slide presentation, you'll see a list of school by school, and we won't go through every school, but it'll be there for you, and it's obviously posted on board docs for public consumption, for folks to see this. What I wanted to spend some time with right now is just looking at growth and demand for classroom space that gives board members a clear sense of kind of where we've been and where we think we're going. So what you see on the screen now is 5-year annual average growth rates and 10-year average annual growth rates in different parts of the county. So Crestview is the place where unrestricted growth can occur. That's where all housing There's not a lot of space left in Fort Walton. There's some space in Crestview, obviously, with Deer Moss Creek coming under development as well. Crestview's where the unrestricted growth can occur, and we all know that. Over the last 5 and 10 years, you'll see the growth rate there is at 1.6%. That's among all schools in the Crestview area. In the central area, the growth has actually been higher. 2.6% over the last 5 years and 2.8% over the last 10 years. Now, one of the things I factor out of that is, the STEM Academy came online in 2013, which brings kids in from all across the district, so that's kind of a magnet school. That might impact those percentages by 1/10 of a point, give or take.
I was going to say, it's what, 300 kids?
Not much,
Yeah.
and a lot of them live in the
Right.
Niceville area
Right.
as well, so not a huge impact. The south is where you'll see the modest, if any, growth, and folks, you know that. Destin, interestingly, 10-year growth is 1.4, and then 5-year growth is 2.5. So to me, that's an indicator that maybe in the last 5 years, we were seeing more growth, obviously, than we have. All this post-dates the recession timeframe, so what we're seeing is relatively steady growth from a county-wide perspective in terms of enrollment. And I'll explain to you what that means in terms of kids and classroom needs in just a moment.
Well, and I just wanted to comment for the citizens that this school board, and when I say that, I mean school boards before us as well, has been fiscally responsible, painfully so, because as your graphic shows, in the south zone, the south area, the school board has closed 3 schools there over the past 25, 30 years. And those were painful decisions, but the reality was, because of your figures, there weren't enough students to keep those schools open. And so previous school boards made the painful decisions to close those schools and being fiscally responsible. And it's important for the taxpayers and the citizens to know that we do work hard to manage our resources, even when it's very, very painful.
Yes, sir.
If I might ask one question, Steve, I know that you just made the comment that these figures were based on pre-recession,
Post.
after
Yeah,
recession.
so, yes, sir.
And the reason I ask is, having been on the municipal side, I know our comprehensive growth program plan required that we provide figures to the district about the projected growth on a yearly basis. Are we getting those figures from all the municipalities, and so that we can roll them into this number? Because without, accurate, up-to-date numbers, it causes us to have a problem with our projections.
Yeah, Bill is our liaison with those entities in terms of getting information from them. He's done a great job providing me with information regarding housing starts and other pieces throughout the county so that we can track that as well. Bill, do you have any comments to add on the other piece?
We get notification on every plan amendment, every development order, everything from county and municipality.
Good.
But in terms of in just overall population growth as well, we track that also.
Good deal.
And Bill, it'd be fair to say that the housing starts are up in the north and not as much everywhere else?
That's correct.
So he actually just did get updates on those from all of our municipalities within the last month or so we have those available. So then what this looks like in Okaloosa County is our average growth in student population being shown in that graph. Our current population OCSD is 31,235. Now, the first slide, if you're remembering, it said over 32,000 kids. Remember, that included our public charter schools that we don't have a responsibility for in terms of facilities and growth. So we've paired those out. So now we're looking at district enrollment right now. Here's the assumption. The annual growth rate continues at 1.4 for the next 10 years, which is what it has been the last 10 years in this district. That would generate 4,658 more students by 2030. Okay? So just projecting long-term. If we were to use a class size average of 23, and that number derived because we have 18 at the K3 level, 22 at the 4-5 level, at 4-8 level, and 25 at the 9-12 for some courses, not all. Anybody do the math ahead of time?
Not that quick.
So the long-term need then looks to be about 203 more classrooms. keeping in mind that we have 160 plus portables right now that we wish we could do something with, we'd like to do something with. So that puts our 10-year projected need at around 370 classrooms. Now again, if you would envision, so I'm just going to throw this out there, if you would envision an elementary school, for example, as having 60 classrooms, that's a large elementary school, and it was all elementary kids, you'd be talking about six more schools worth of classrooms. Middle school, high school. So the need is there. Obviously, it's spread out among geographic and grade level, but there are certain areas where I think that part of our discussion has to be about, not just fixing today, but making sure we have an eye on the future. Obviously, based on this information, the largest impacts would be in Crestview, Niceville, and Destin population centers. So then, one of the things that we have to contemplate, and again, I'm not bringing a final recommendation to you today, superintendent's not bringing a recommendation today, but I think we have to be very deliberate when looking at population growth of this type, where it's occurring, and what we may need to do. So think about a situation where you might have 4 schools over here, all of the same type. They all have portables, 6, 8 portables. They all have overcrowding in all of their infrastructure and site, cafeteria, restrooms, parent pick-up, drop-off, all those pieces. And so you have 4 schools here, which that's an issue today. One option would be to go in with a capital program and add a wing, expand the cafeteria to a cafetorium, expand the site work, the parking pickup, drop-off, the parking spaces, do work with the restrooms, add another playground, do those sorts of things. And so one option is to do those sorts of things at 4 different schools and accrue the cost of doing it at 4 locations. And then when you're finished at those 4 locations, now maybe you have a school that is 1,000 or 1,100 kids. So that's one thing. The other approach would be, well, what is the cost of doing that at all 4 schools? And it's X. What is the cost of identifying and locating and creating a new school, constructing a new school? And that's Y. And if X is equal to Y, which is not in algebra, doesn't work in algebra, but if X is equal to or close to Y, then does it make sense to look at new construction as a longer-term solution? And I think in places where we believe the growth is consistent and continuing, and where we already have problems in schools right now, by law, we can only serve students lunch between 10 and 2. I've got some elementary schools that tell me they're pushing up against those boundaries right now because of the number of kids they've got to get through the cafeteria facilities. So one of the things that we're looking at, the superintendent's having us look at very carefully, is that concept right there. What's the tipping point from where it makes sense to build a new school? Because if part of this school's capital request is new classroom wing, expanded cafeteria, if it happens over here at a different school location, then those needs kind of go away. And so the ask for that particular school may be more about just the security piece, or it could be about renovating certain things that they've already got in place, if it's an older school, or repairing roofs. So that is a concept that I think we have to carefully look at and evaluate financially, to make sure that we can bring a recommendation back to you about that.
So to expand just a little bit, so one of the questions I think this board will have to answer, that I'll have to answer as well, is how big is too big? You look at Davidson Middle School. Do we want Davidson Middle School to be at 1,500? You look at Blue Water Elementary School. Do we want them approaching 1,200, 1,300? Ruckle, 1,500. What do we want them to look like? Destin Elementary, a K through 4 school, do we want them at 1,200? So it's how big is too big? And like Mr. Horton just said, let's just say that we went to those numbers. What will that cafeteria look like? More bathrooms. So there's a lot goes into this, but how big is too big?
And I would just add, and I know that you'll factor this in, and I'll choose this term for you, your calculus, there are personnel costs associated with building new facilities. And so when you run your calculations, and of course those costs will not be a part of these funds. So you'll have to include all that should you choose to add, present to us adding schools.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right, and they're ongoing.
And I'll just make a comment too, on a slightly different topic, but having lived and worked in both of those last two schools that were built, Davidson Middle and Destin Middle, I think it's really unfair and inequitable if we build two schools at the same time, and one is a ramp school with all of the potential extra issues that brings, and one is an indoor school. I think we should really carefully consider being equitable to all of the citizens in all of our schools, and whatever model we choose, they look similar.
Mm-hmm. And I think that was done with was it Blue Water and Walker, whenever they were built back in the 70s or 80s, and those are identical schools. So your point's well taken. So this is not anything other than some food for thought. I think when you look at the growth, we have to do some analysis as to if or where some potential schools could be constructed. If you look at the Crestview area right now, their elementary schools are over capacity all. Their middle schools are now over capacity all. So there's contemplation of looking at an analysis of what it would take to get those sets of schools up to where they could not only handle their existing students, but also growth. And so those two are contemplated. I think in the central zone, there's the highest growth rate right now in the central zone at about 2.6%. The interesting thing there is the central zone has not been accepting controlled open enrollment waivers from other areas. So one of the things that to look at obviously is, are there several hundred kids in the last 5 years, while the growth has still been high in the central zone, are there hundreds of kids that are still coming down from other areas of the county and filling up these schools? And since I work in controlled open enrollment, I know that PLU and Blue Water and Edge to a lesser extent and Ruckle have all been closed, and Niceville's been closed for the last couple of years. They've all been closed for the last several years. And so the growth that we're seeing in these schools is not just at first glance attributable to folks from other parts of the county coming to school in Niceville, which I think used to be a lot more prevalent. And Bill brought that up to me as something that we need to make sure we look at carefully, because you don't want to show growth in an area where it's because folks are coming in from other parts of the county.
And isn't it more challenging too in the central because we're somewhat landlocked by water and bases, and it's going to be more challenging for our area.
We are landlocked in this area. There's the Deer Moss Creek property is kind of open up for development. That's going to take a while. Mm-hmm. So I think the analysis will be over the next couple of months is what is that tipping point of cost analysis versus trying to get all these schools. And again, some of the sites, Plu Elementary is landlocked, and so how many more portables or wings or additions can be put on a school that's in that facility to accommodate the students. So those are the questions that we'll be addressing. Destin Elementary right now, Destin Middle is at capacity. They've got portables. Destin Elementary is a K-4 school. Keep in mind they're a K-4 school. They are closing in on 1,000 as a K-4 school right now. And so that's a tremendous challenge. So what we want to do is look at an analysis of because there's a lot of property on that campus, the Destin Elementary campus, that potentially building a K-2 center there and what that would look like and what it would allow us to do in the Destin community, because like I said, with 2 schools only and the population growing the way that it is, we've got to come up with a solution there.
And Mr. Horton, that's kind of what I meant when I said about the painful decision to
Yes,
close
sir.
schools, because what that really means is that you will be reassigning families to a different school. And in the case of closing a whole school, you're reassigning all of them. And should you build a new school, I mean, my experience was most folks are happy to go to a new school, but your zones will be hugely important, particularly in terms of what you just spoke about pertaining to open enrollment, because I don't think we'd want to build a new school and all of a sudden fill it from folks outside of the zone because we might have put it in the wrong place.
Well, to your last statement, we'll hopefully make sure we're planned enough not to do that. But you're exactly right. So it may be that we contemplate, if this moves in the direction, bringing back to the board some potential policy changes, because the board authorizes our controlled open enrollment policy, and we may contemplate in new schools that we don't do that. We don't allow open enrollment to fill that school up, because we want to make sure that the population it's intended to address, it addresses.
Right.
And then the other piece on the whole world of controlled open enrollment now, we would contemplate if another school opened here, and I've got maybe a small group of parents here and students who wish to finish out their enrollment at a school that they've been at. The law provides them the ability to do that under controlled open enrollment. So I think we would, if we're doing that and we still have portables, let's just say we would still have portables on certain campuses, that it may be feasible. It may be feasible in the short term to allow someone to finish out a grade level or something like that, as opposed to forcing them to a new school. But I agree with you. New schools typically draw a lot of interest and attention from families, but all critical components that have to be well articulated and shared and discussed.
If I'm not mistaken, when we opened Shoal River and Riverside, I think for the first year, they didn't really allow anybody except for those that were actually zoned for that school, just to kind of get a feel to where it was going. I know for 2 years, I mean, Riverside was half full or half empty, no matter how you want to look at it, but because they didn't allow the transfers to come in unless it was a hardship case, of course.
And you bring up a good point, because that's the other piece on the backside of some of this, when it is apparent to folks that the first year or two of a new school and the enrollment, they're seeing space for the first time in a long time. They're seeing no long pickup lines and things like that, and they're wondering, should we have built a school here? Right? I think that was asked about Destin Middle School a long time ago, and whether or not and so you've been out there, Dr. Kelly. It's full now, and so I think there's that sweet spot of when to build, understanding that if it fills up day one, then that means we probably should have built a few years earlier. But you're exactly right. I think anytime you build, ideally, our schools should be sitting at about 75% capacity, to be very healthy. And when a school gets to 80% capacity and you're starting to see growth and you see recognized, that's when we should be making decisions and thoughts about what to do next. And it's been a lack of funding. It hasn't been a lack of forethought on the side of on the part of the school boards before us. It's been a lack of funding. So right now we're working on solving problems with schools at 105, 110% of capacity. And it's a complex situation, but we've got to move forward in a direction.
So before we go on to the next slide, while we're still here, I want you to talk about land for a second. And it's interesting when you talk about land, Dr. Bill Smith, amazingly, he knows where every parcel of land is in Okaloosa County, which blows my mind a little bit. But just briefly talk about just some of the discussions that we've talked about as it pertains to land.
Well, so obviously, that's a consideration with any new school construction, and and Dr. Kelly brought it up earlier. There's a cost to that that typically is not advertised in the construction of a school, because it's something the district would have to have in hand. And I think Bill a year or two ago gave an update to the board on all the parcels of land that we have, and I think you've got that documentation. I've been in contact, and Bill's a great representative with the military, and I know that we're always very interested in discussing with them any options and opportunities that may be out there in terms of any kind of land we can get. He's not actively involved in conversations at this time with them, and that's an ongoing process, a long process. I've also been speaking with developer here in Niceville about just kind of getting information. So I think that's a process that we'd have to undertake relatively quickly if we make a decision to go the route of school construction. There's land in the district, but that's in the district's land bank, but it's not always necessarily in the exact place that you want it to be. So then I think there's pieces where the board might authorize us to negotiate, to swap land, to do other things that would provide us parcels where we believe we need them.
Mr. Horton, real quick, Dr. Smith, I know you gave that package to us a few years ago, and out of respect to Dr. Kelly and Ms. Ivanchek, I don't think they have that package. Is there any way we can get them so they'll be up to date on that? Yes, sir, thank you. They'll be interested to see where we have property sitting.
The growth in the south end being what it was, I think the focus in the south end would be classrooms where they need to be added. So we do have portables in the south end, there's no question about that, but identifying those and where we can do it efficiently, adding classroom space there. Our smallest school in the south end right now is Edwin's. I think a number of years ago, there was some discussion about Edwin's as a school, but their enrollment actually hit 500 for the first time in a long time this year. And they have a slew of portables as well. So I wouldn't have any recommendations for you about any schools in the south end. I think we need every one we have at this point in time. And the fact that we've got dozens of portables down there kind of attests to that. This is a slide that just identifies general population growth in Okaloosa County. So we referenced that earlier. It's provided through World Population Review. It shows about a 1.7 overall growth rate up through 2018, and I'll get the updated information as soon as I can get it to you on that. But the county as a whole has got just slow to moderate growth for the last 10 years. These other slides I'm not going to spend any time on, if that's okay with you. They just simply show for your reference population, student enrollment population in all of our schools over 10 years. And so we've got it broken out by North End, Central, South, and then Destin. So it just lets you see for particular schools in your area what's been happening with those in terms of enrollment over the past 10 years. Sometimes we'll see a spike a year, and we have to make sure we don't overreact to something that we see and make sure that it's something that looks to be sustainable. For Orm Beach High School's enrollment went up this past year, the current year that we're in, a significant amount. We expected that as students from Destin that are zoned to Fort Walton travel to Fort Walton, as Niceville was a closed school from enrollment standpoint. So we expected that movement to occur. Obviously with the Destin Charter High School, there's a possibility there for some of that enrollment to be drawn back to that school. So we have to contemplate that in our projections.
It's interesting, if you could go back to the north one real quick. And of course, I represent the majority of the North End schools over there. But I know when you did your presentation at Crestview High School a few weeks ago, and of course I hear it all the time. When we get into when we're going to get a new high school, when we're going to get a new high school. It's interesting to see the 10-year average growth on that. That's one of the lower ones. So it's very interesting to see those numbers there.
0.6, yes, sir.
Yeah.
What you'll notice in that slide is Davidson growing at the rate of almost 3% a year. So obviously Davidson feeds into Crestview. Shoal River Middle School feeds into Crestview. We're seeing both those schools' enrollment go up.
Right.
We want to look, are the middle school enrollments going up, but the elementary school enrollments are going down? Because if that's happening, then we've got a bubble coming through. We just need to figure out a way to weather it. If the elementary enrollments are going up and the middle enrollments are going up, then it's pointing to the fact that enrollment's going up.
Right.
And we have to address that. But so some of that is maybe going to start to catch up with Crestview in the next few years. I know
Right.
they've got a fairly good size incoming freshman class this year, maybe not as big as last year's, but that number should be up a little bit for the 2021 school year.
Right. But looking at a 10-year,
Yes, sir.
though, it's very,
Yes, sir. I mean,
very flat.
When I ask folks to tell me what they think that growth rate is, they'll say 8%, 5%, and
Right.
it's 0.6%.
Right.
And all of that discussion plays into what was the designed capacity of the existing facility and what additional amendments, if you will, we've made to that capacity with additional space, whether it be portables or new construction. Because some of these schools were built for smaller numbers of students.
They were, and you see that in the cafeterias and the other ancillary facilities on campus, that they're not built to handle the number of classrooms
Exactly.
we've added to them.
We also always want to remember over the last 4 years, 5 years, the ramp up of military presence in that area.
Yep.
And I don't see that going down. So while the long-term average is lower than we expect, I would anticipate in the future, and that may be exactly what's manifested in itself in the middle schools,
Right.
is that ramp up on military presence.
No, I was just, and I agree with you there. I was surprised when you said that number. I really was.
Well, that's changing. I don't see the
Yeah.
world changing where that's going to go down.
All right.
So now what you have, and if I can beg off to not go through every one of these slides, but just show the first one to give an indication of the kind of work that was done in talking with the schools. So you'll see some items on the left-hand side for a particular school. You'll see some X marks as identified as a need at that school. And then you'll see some columns, A, B, C, D. And so generally speaking, principals provided us with some prioritization from their perspective. You'll notice on these individual sheets that things like single point of entry and site work are all a priority. There are some other items there that may change in terms of their priority or their actual need. Because I think these individual slides at this moment, as you're seeing them, contemplate the fixes on that campus and don't speak to the situation that I expressed about 4 campuses maybe not needing fixes because of new school construction. So this is obviously, I would consider it draft. Anybody that we share it with obviously would, the board or no one obviously is bound by this list at any moment in time, because we don't have a resolution or anything yet. And so you'll receive a final list for every school once we get to that point. I just thought it'd be helpful and transparent to add this for each school on the slide. There are 2 schools, we must have had a glitch. We'll add those, Eglin Elementary and Elliott Point. Something in the E's knocked off 2, so I believe those have been sent to me, and I'll update the document for you to have.
And Chairman, I might add, I've sat with them for about 3 hours last week, and these slides represent weeks, if not months, worth of work by the staff and the principals and the SAC committees. It's a monumentous task to try to make these, and they've taken a good stab at it.
Certainly, and Les Rose is here from Jacobs Titan, obviously can speak to any specific questions you have about that process, but they have done a great job in partnering with us to identify some of these needs, and I think it gives everyone the understanding there's a second set of eyes looking at it even from the front end. So the Citizens Oversight Group on the back end evaluating the use of these, but also we've got a company that's been doing this across the country for a long time, can provide some valuable input to us.
Well, Superintendent, I'd like to make a request, and my colleagues might concur. If it would be based on some of the kinds of questions that I've received from different community meetings that I've attended about this initiative, if it might be possible to put this presentation, just an excerpt of this specific presentation in today's workshop on our school district webpage on the very, very front, so that when these kinds of questions are asked, I can simply refer folks to OkaloosaSchools.com. It's on the front page. And then in addition to the video expert, you did a great job. Video excerpt, if we could also perhaps have some of these slides, because I think they really go to the heart of some of the kinds of questions, specific, detailed questions that folks have asked me. And I would love to have the opportunity to try to explain them with some of the information that you've provided to us, but also to refer them to that quick link on our homepage. And I would ask the attorney, would that be something that we could do? I mean, we're presenting this in public, so.
Certainly. Yes, sir. This is a public presentation, so it can certainly be included there. It's factual information. It includes work that Mr. Horton and staff have done to project, but it's all district information.
So that would be a request then, I would ask, and it would, and I know that folks that are working on this initiative are making presentations in various places constantly, and it might be a benefit to them as well, to have ready access to this information and to refer citizens to this link so that they'll be able to have exactly what we have that demonstrates the need of these funds. So if that would be something you would look at, and I think Mr. McNeely could just make an excerpt of this workshop of just this portion so that folks wouldn't be so bored as to have to watch the whole thing.
I definitely think that's a great idea, and we can do that.
Right.
And the last slide that I moved off of was just simply a discussion slide, so obviously, is there questions or comments, I can stand or
Well,
sit.
I'm going to go around and
Okay.
start with Dr. Kelly. I'm sure you.
Well, the only other question that spawned was only because it was a thought when I was at the district office was, is there consideration ever in the case of a situation like with Crestview? I know the citizens have talked to me primarily because I spent a good deal of my career there, but in the case where people don't necessarily want a second big high school, is there consideration for maybe a 9th grade center or any of those other maybe different configurations?
I
Maybe
think-
applicable to other communities too. That's just the one that has
No,
brought it to my
that's
attention.
good input, obviously, and as we look at Crestview High School, and at this point, not part of a recommendation to build a second high school, I think there is a lot of sentiment in that community about being a bulldog.
Yeah, exactly. Once a
Um,
bulldog, always a
but
bulldog.
I
My
do-
daughter too.
Yes, ma'am. So I do think there are different thoughts circulating about that school and how to, if we need to expand its capacity some on premise, how that might look.
Mhm.
That's a very good
Okay.
observation.
And there is room there to expand out there, so, I mean, we do have room out there. Dr. Wayne?
No, I've talked too much already, so I'm good.
Your input has been very much appreciated, so, Mr. Destin.
Well, I just want to congratulate the staff and Jacobs Titan. They're trying to look at this thing from every angle. Crestview is a prime one. What can you do there? It obviously is going to grow. There is some property surrounding that, and there's room on the campus right now. So, I look forward to hearing some unique solutions to that problem.
Well, my only comment is just looking at one of those slides, there was 2 words that came out, and it was vision and forward. And this school board, superintendent, previous school boards and superintendents have a vision to move forward. And we will continue to move forward. We have a vision. Unfortunately, we only have so much we can do with the money that's given us. So with the vision to move forward, the half-cent sales tax, if the citizens of Okaloosa County do vote for it, I want them to look at it as a vision, as an investment in our future. Like you said, you talked about retirement. We're not all going to be here in 10, 15, 20 years. We're going to be doing something else, but we owe it to the future of our school district to have a vision to move forward. And I think this is just a part that's going to help us be able to achieve that. So whether you have kids in school or not, or you're a property owner or not, we all have a vested interest in our public education here in Okaloosa County. And I would just look at it from this. Somebody took the time to invest in me to get to where I'm at, and I think I owe it to those children that are going to be coming up that aren't in school right now, that aren't born yet, but give them the opportunity to have a state-of-the-art facility that they're going to be able to get the best education possible. And we've already proven in Okaloosa County, we are a top-rated school district. And I'm very proud of that, as well as my fellow school board members. But for the general public, the schools, if this doesn't pass, guess what? On the next day, we're still going to pick your children up. We're still going to take them to school. We're going to feed them. We're going to do all of that, and we're going to do it proudly. But just look at it as an investment in the future of our school district moving forward. So I like the vision forward thing.
If I could add to that, not only is that true, and I certainly support that notion, but the fact that healthy schools are the best indicator of a healthy community. And I feel like when people come here and they move here primarily for our schools. And when you look around and you see the health of our communities and you see the businesses thriving and the homeowners associations thriving, that's an indicator that the schools are healthy. But I don't know how long we can continue to be at the top ranking as our facilities degrade year after year and decade after decade. So to me, that's an even greater thought.
And real quick, Mr. Horton, you didn't bring this up, but in fairness to the half-cent sales tax, the county had recently passed theirs 2 years ago, and they've already got their first indicators of how much money's coming in. But at what percentage is the tax burden on the local level for that particular half-cent sales tax?
So this isn't my research, but I think there are groups out there that are stating that, based on their research, that upwards of 56% of the sales tax revenue that would be generated from this surtax would come from tourists.
And just to add, that's huge for property owners, meaning that that's not revenue that property owners are being taxed for.
Yes, sir.
And being assessed.
And then the other things too, because I've spoken with some folks, maybe even fixed income folks that are elderly. This sales surtax does not impact groceries, obviously, because we don't pay tax on groceries. Right. It doesn't impact medicines.
Good.
And so there are some limitations to it. And the other thing too is, for those of us contemplating buying a car or making a large purchase, the first $5,000 of that purchase would be subject to this half-cent surtax, but nothing beyond. Now, you still pay the 6% all the way to the top.
That's the state that did that.
That's the state that did that. But, so there are a lot of safeguards in place for those folks who may be on fixed incomes to have a smaller impact. So it's a good thing.
Well, and one thing that I hear, and I know all of us hear this, but the biggest one is, when I go over to Alabama, I look at all their new schools, but I also remind them, look at your receipt when you're paying. There's some type of sales tax in there to help fund those schools or fund those roads. And you just drive up from Crestview to Andalusia and you see a nice, new, beautiful school. Of course, it's about 20 years old now, but Greenville High School, Carver High School in Montgomery. So look at your receipt on the bottom. That's coming from those additional sales taxes that helping fund those schools.
Yes, sir. And I'll say one last thing, obviously, and answer any questions you have, but it's been stated at some meetings that I've been at, and it kind of hit home with me, by no action or inaction of the board, but there are those that said if we had only had this sales surtax even 2 years ago, 2018,
we tried.
that would have been by no action, by no issue of the board, but we would have had $46 million approximately in our coffers, which would have completely funded a school, new school construction. And so when you look at that, you think about it, it kind of hits home.
And I do want to just say lastly, and it almost piggybacks on what you said, Mr. Bryant, what you said, Dr. Kelly as well, this half-cent sales tax, if we were fortunate enough to get it, one, obviously it would impact our school district greatly, from our students to our teachers, staff, administrators, but this also impacts the community. What I get asked all the time is, look at those schools over there in Walton County. Look at those schools. And I've even had some say, hey, we're going over there to live because of some of these new schools. So just imagine the current facilities that we have, though we work extremely hard to keep them up. Just imagine what would potentially happen over time. We're fortunate enough to be a part of the Economic Development Council and all the new businesses that want to come to this area. The first question that they ask is about the schools. So this is something that is, I think it's coming to a tipping point, and hopefully we're fortunate enough to get the support for this, but this is a school issue, but this is also a community issue.
And if I could just add, Superintendent, for our citizens and the community, that having those folks locate their businesses here with us is a wonderful thing for property values. And for those folks that are property owners, that increase of folks that would come here to relocate here helps elevate their property values, none of which would be taxed as a result of this initiative.